Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone.
And good morning to some of them, Florida.
Oh, yes. We're almost good evening to Cape Town.
Yep.
No, Cape Town, same time zone as us.
2 hours behind. Ahead.
Oh,
Nice.
Amsterdam. Nice. Oh, and Toulouse. In this screen. How are you doing? Cool. Nice.
Gotta be somebody from Manchester. All these interesting companies. Heidelberg, lovely. Been to Heidelberg, very pretty.
Recognize some of the names. So we've got a fan club, Brian. People coming up for the
names
third
I
time.
recognise there as well.
Yes.
Nice.
It's always a good sign when people come back. When do you want to kick off, Brian?
Entirely up to you. And we think there's enough, but we should probably go fairly soon, shouldn't we?
I would think so, yeah, if you want
Yeah.
time for question and answers.
Indeed.
Okay, well, I'll kick off then. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, I think we said. It always gives me a great pleasure to welcome a global audience to our webinars. And this today is hosted by Scaled Agile and Ivar Jacobsen. My name is Bev O'Connor. I work for Scaled Agile. I'm the territory director for the UK, Ireland and South Africa, which basically means I have the pleasure of looking after all our lovely customers and business partners within that region. So it is actually my pleasure to welcome you to our third and final session in our trilogy of webinars that we've been running, focused on organising around value. And as you can see today, we're very much looking at funding and reporting. Brian, do you want to go to the next screen?
Yes, but Zoom has focus. There we go. That's what we're after.
Thank you very much. So as you can see today, the session will be recorded. And like all the other two sessions, if you enjoy today, you can go back and see the other two sessions, which are available on the Ivar Jacobsen's website. So please go back and have a look if you find today's interesting as well, and you'll be able to get access to today's at the end of the presentation. As ever, this is it's about you getting the most out of this you possibly can. As Brian goes through his presentation today, I have no doubt that you will be thinking of all sorts of questions. If you've got questions, could you put them in the Q&A session at the bottom of the Zoom screen rather than the chat? If you can put them in the Q&A, that would be brilliant. And what we'll do is collate those at the end and we'll have a question and answer session with Brian. But let's promote our networking. Please do keep your comments coming in the chat. Let us know where you're calling from. We love to know where you're all calling in from. My final job today really is just to introduce our two panelists so you know who's sort of speaking with you and supporting you today. Firstly, let me introduce you to Odile Moreau. Odile is a strategic advisor and an SBCT for Scaled Agile, and she supports our EMEA team and all the regions within EMEA. Odile is French, born and raised in France, but she has lived in multiple countries for a number of years, and hence the reason she's such a super linguist and speaks all sorts of languages. She's got 20 plus years supporting numerous organizations across differing disciplines in business and software management. Odile has, for the last 10 years, really been focusing on supporting and inspiring leaders and teams in adopting Agile at scale. And she does this with a passion and an enthusiasm not many others do, which is what makes her quite a favorite amongst our customers and business partners. And today, Odile's job is to take all those great questions that you're going to put in the Q&A chat at the bottom of the screen, Q&A session, not chat. And then she'll facilitate a question and answer session with Brian at the end of the presentation. So we get to work on some of those questions that come out of today's session. So let me introduce you to Brian. Brian's the main presenter today. He's the principal consultant to Ivor Jacobson, which is one of our most prestigious business partners. Brian's a SAFE fellow and an SPCT, and in fact was one of the first trainers outside of Scaled Agile to qualify as an SPCT. He's also got the auspicious accolade of having delivered the program consultant training more than anybody else globally, which is quite an achievement. But alongside his training engagements, Brian has been involved in SAFE implementations across multiple industries and numerous companies. He's going to bring all that experience to bear today. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Brian to kick off the session. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you. So I've been asked by Scaled Agile to cover the topic of organising around value. Mighty big topic to cover, impossible to do it justice in just a short soundbite, so it became a series of 3 webinars. In the first webinar 4 weeks ago, we looked at aligning around value and the challenges that presents. The recording is available from the Ivor Jacobson website. The links were in the chat a few entries ago. In the last webinar 2 weeks ago, we got practical by exploring the value stream and art identification workshop and looked at patterns for development value streams. And in this webinar, we'll tackle funding and reporting, how to enable empowerment and hold it accountable. Now, I'm reckoning on just over 30 minutes of me talking, which should leave plenty of time for questions at the end. As always, I will caveat this presentation with, it's my interpretation. You might interpret things differently. You are quite at liberty to do so. Unfortunately, like so many things in this world, there is no right answer. If you want to take a different path, by all means, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. All I'll do is ask, do the metrics show that it's better than before? Follow the data. Empowerment. Why? Why do we want empowerment? Empowerment means the organization loses direct control of the workforce. But empowerment is one of the mechanisms through which the organization can deliver faster, better, cheaper, and happier, because the employees can make decisions for themselves quickly, rather than patiently waiting for someone of appropriate seniority to decide for them. So back to first principles. If you want the principle cards, they're available free from the IGI website, link there on the slide. Let's look at some of the principles that are going to influence empowerment. Principle number 8, unlock the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers. And if you're subscribing to Dan Pink's theories from his book Drive, then it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, empowerment to work out how to do things for yourself. Mastery, to be getting better at the things you do. And purpose, that you're doing things for a reason. Principle number 9, decentralized decision making. If you cast your mind back to the David Marquet video from whenever you last did a leading SAFE training, he had 2 pillars, competence and clarity. Competence, that people have the skill they need to be able to decide how to do what they do, which ties in with the mastery of principle number 8. Clarity, that everyone knows what they're trying to achieve, which ties in with the purpose part of principle number 8. From the perspective of ensuring that the organization is doing the right thing, the interesting part about principle number 9 is that not everything should be decentralized. Decentralize everything that's frequent, urgent, and where the local information is going to be better, and only centralize the infrequent, long-lasting decisions where everyone must abide by the decision once made. The tagline on the card expresses this quite nicely. Centralized strategy, localized execution. Strategic decisions tend to be infrequent, long-lasting, and everyone should be following the strategy. The strategy provides clarity and purpose. But there's always a but, isn't there? Decentralization isn't a fire and forget mechanic. You absolutely need to close the accountability loop to check that the localized execution decisions being made are actually moving the organization towards whatever has been outlined in the strategy. How do you know whether you're moving in the right direction? Metrics, measurement. Principle 5, base milestones on objective evaluation of working systems. Every PI, the metrics should be gathered to inform the organization of the progress that has been made. Real metrics, business measures, cold hard cash, or whatever passes for value in your organization, which leads us to economics. Principle number 1, take an economic view. Metrics, measures are driving the decision-making process. You should have an economic framework from decision-making. An economic framework for decision-making is a strategy for decision-making. Strategy is something we might want to centralize. Provide an economic framework for how to make decisions, then empower the edges of the organization to gather the local information to feed the economic framework so they can make decisions for themselves. So if we want to enable empowerment, we should be unlocking the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers, decentralizing decision-making, and to do that, we need people competent at making decisions about the things they're experts on, and they need clarity of vision on what it is they're trying to achieve. Through basing milestones on objective evaluation of working systems, we can measure progress towards the vision. And by basing decisions on economics and providing an economic strategy for making decisions, we can influence decentralized decision-making whilst still empowering the people to make decisions. Framework. Noun. A basic conceptual structure as of ideas. What do you want from your framework? Innovation and collaboration with less bureaucracy, or instructions and compliance with more bureaucracy? If you want people to think, replace instructions with intent. You give intent to them, they give you intent back. But not everything should be decentralized out. For David Marquet, the submarine captain, there was one thing that he alone had to have authority over. For him, it was the decision to launch a weapon, the point where other human lives are at stake. That was his moral and ethical responsibility to make that decision. What does your organization need to retain control over? What can't be negotiated, can't be decentralized? Every organization needs just enough common practice and structure to make things work and provide alignment, transparency, flow, and frictionless governance. A minimum viable bureaucracy. I can imagine that some of you are already bristling at the mention of the B word, bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is bad. We don't need no stinking bureaucracy. Fine. No bureaucracy, no structure, no problem. I'll pay the wage bill when I get around to paying the wage bill. Oh, you wanted the wage bill paid at the end of the month, did you? You want that little bit of bureaucracy. bureaucracy process of itself isn't bad. Too much bureaucracy is bad because it constrains things such that there is little time for doing the work and no scope for evolution or change. Too little bureaucracy results in chaos. Nobody has a clue what's being done, how it's being done, or what anything actually means. There is a precarious balancing act that organizations face, hovering between chaos and constraint. It's another U-curve style optimization. Neither extreme is right. Your organizations, you have to find the sweet spot in the middle that is right for you. Ideally, any minimum viable bureaucracy needs to promote your intended culture, i.e. lean and agile, provide focus to allow people to make decisions quickly, thus reducing latency, enable experiments and empiricism, and that allows us to eliminate waste, and it should implement a common language so that when we talk, we all know what we're talking about, and it needs to encompass the whole organization. Now, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty certain the bureaucracy currently running your organization isn't the absolute minimum necessary to keep the organization viable and functioning. If you want to scale up whilst empowering your organization to move fast, you need to scale back on the bureaucracy, replace centralized control with intent, and close the accountability loop to ensure that everyone is moving in the right direction. Even regulatory, compliance, security concerns, centrally, all you need to do is say, don't forget about it, which empowers the pieces of the organization to work out how they're going to address the relevant concerns. Then close the accountability loop and check that they have. Within an organization, there are a set of non-negotiable, universally applicable things. Values and principles are always greater than practices. The principles are fundamental truths, universally applicable, regardless of framework or practice. We also want a common vocabulary and the minimum viable bureaucracy to be part of this non-negotiable set. SAFE is a huge collection of suggested processes and practices that you could potentially do dependent upon circumstances. It's hugely beneficial because it gives organizations a starting point for adoption, so they don't have to evolve the understanding and ways of working for themselves from first principles. A task that is potentially beyond the expertise of organizations that are steeped in historic management practices. Even essential SAFE, the minimum viable bureaucracy is less than essential SAFE. It has to be. The minimum viable bureaucracy are the things we cannot change, where teams are not empowered to evolve and adapt. It has to be as small as it possibly can be. Within essential SAFE, while Scaled Agile would assert you have to be doing all of it to claim that you're doing SAFE, there is still plenty of scope for evolution, for customization, for change. You can even evolve away from essential SAFE, just don't claim you're doing SAFE when you've now moved on to something of your own invention. And certainly don't blame Scaled Agile if what you've invented goes wrong. Through all of that evolution, this way and that, the minimum viable bureaucracy must still hold. So what is a minimum? Well, every organization is going to be unique, but there are some basics that I would be elaborating upon to describe any given organization. Alignment through time boxes and shared goals. Alignment itself is a core value of SAFE. Time boxes are principle number 7, cadence and synchronization, and shared goals are the intent from SAFE principle 9, decentralized decision making. Transparency through standard backlogs and practice independent measures. Transparency is a core value. Collaboration through common roles and responsibilities. Collaboration is a fundamental part of working as a team, be it a single agile team or as part of a massive corporate entity. Empowerment through autonomy and experimentation. Well, autonomy is a contributor to SAFe Principle 8, unlock the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers, and it comes from adopting SAFe Principle 9, decentralized decision making. Experimentation is SAFe Principle 3, assume variability, preserve options, which needs SAFe Principles 4 and 5 to make it work, and allows SAFe Principle 2, apply systems thinking. Now, it's all very well to say that this sort of enshrines the values and principles, but what does it look like in real world terms? Everyone in the organization is operating to the same synchronized cadence. Line up the program increments and the iterations within them. Every team or train produces a set of objectives for the program increment. Agile release trains do this through PI planning. Smaller, independent teams won't need the large formal events, but they do need to produce the objectives. The objectives allow every team or train to assess themselves at the end. Did they meet their commitments? And from that, retrospectives can inspect and adapt. Transparency with standard backlogs, common artifacts in standard backlogs. Everyone knows what a feature is. Everyone knows how to format one so they can get a request into a team or train. If every team had different backlog items, would anyone know what item had to be created in order to negotiate work into a team? Standardizing the representation of the work isn't standardizing the process by which a team or train does the work. Teams and trains must have freedom over how they do the work because different teams and trains face different challenges and will need different processes and tools to address those challenges. A data analytics team is going to have a very different process from embedded software development, which is going to be different from, say, a marketing team. Even single team setups can benefit from features describing the releasable points and epics describing the overarching business change and how it is being measured. Whatever measures the minimum viable bureaucracy is tracking, they need to be independent of the practices, because as we've just described, different teams could be using wildly different practices and processes. Release of value tends to be universally applicable. Software, hardware, even more business-oriented teams, they all realize and release value in some form. So that would be the first thing to track. And it's in line with the goal of lean. Value in the sustainably shortest lead time, because it's tracking value. Deployment, completion tend to be fairly universal, but they're further away from that goal. Release of value checks that it's been produced, doesn't validate whether what's been released is actually valuable. So track the business outcomes and KPIs, business outcomes of epics or related to strategic themes. These are true measures of the business, therefore universally applicable. The tooling can help track contributions from one item to another, stories to features to epics, that you can see progress being made, insight into what is being worked on. It does require discipline to ensure that data within the tooling is consistent. Inconsistent data and your governance is based on lies. Focus on the right level. We're discussing organizational governance. We care about business outcomes on epics and the metrics attached to strategic themes. They're affected by release of value, so metrics around released features can be useful. But the rest, well, that's for the levels to use for their own understanding and improvement. We shouldn't need to get involved in that sort of detail. Common roles, so that we know who to talk to get information or to get things done. Who do we need to talk to negotiate work into a team or a train through those standard backlogs? Who do we need to talk to find out what the team or train has been doing through practice independent measures? Consistency of the roles and responsibilities across the organization reduces frustration, misunderstanding, and delays. A rose by any other name would smell sweet. William Shakespeare from Romeo and Juliet. Most underlying artifacts within any of the scaling methodologies are actually very similar. But you might just have to accept that your methodology's preferred choice of name might not be the one chosen. Now, I would tend to default towards the safe definitions, and I will fully admit that I'm biased towards that through long years of association. But I would also defend that with the fact that they are probably the most well defined and described, particularly with respect to how they interact with each other at scale. For work items, it would therefore be epics, features, and stories. For the agile team roles and responsibilities, it's product owner, scrum master, team members. For the agile release train roles and responsibilities, it's product manager, system architect, and release train engineer. It can be tempting to invent your own words, but latching on to one of the methodologies is preferable, since when your staff search the internet, they'll get a reference page, whereas if it's your own words, they won't. Or they'll get a page that matches your chosen name, but describes completely the wrong thing. Now, all of that is very interesting, but you came here to find out about funding and reporting. Well, fund the development value streams. They get the cash, they use it to employ people, to create capacity to do work. The challenges of changing to funding development value streams, we really already discussed in the first webinar. Links are back in the chat again. In summary, changing the financial processes might only be possible at the point where funding is decided for another year, so make sure it goes to the development value streams rather than to the work. Transferring the funding away from the work means that those accountable for the work lose the authority that the money granted them. They now have to argue each piece of work, each epic, each feature in terms of how valuable it is to the organization as a whole, and will have to accept that not everything is necessarily going to get done. Other work might be more important, more valuable. But arguing each piece of work on value is chasing that goal of lean, value in the sustainably shortest lead time. If you want your people to think, replace instruction with intent. You give intent to them, they give you intent back. Providing the intent to enable empowerment is the portfolio vision. Now, I can't tell you what your vision should be. Only you, your organization, will know that. But I can illustrate some of the qualities of what makes a useful vision from our perspective. Welcome to Southern England and the centre of the world, London. I can already hear the residents of Rutland complaining that I'm not recognising them as the centre of the world. But for the conversations here, London, it is, and it's also my hometown. Now, I have a vision, and that vision is go west, where the skies are blue. Direction alone, though, is not enough. We want to be better. We want to be more profitable. Whilst these things provide insight into the direction that an organization wants to go, it's not enough, because how do we know when we've got there? Go west doesn't provide a destination. Reading, Swindon, Bristol. These are destinations. They're all in the right direction. They're all west of London. They give us a target point to aim for, a target that we can measure how close we're getting to. They are more concrete. Let's be ambitious. Our target is Bristol. Is that enough for a vision? Maybe the target point is enough, but maybe you care how we get to Bristol. What are the qualities of the solution we're empowering the organization to come up with? If the quality you desired was speed, then the fastest driving route from London to Bristol is the M4 motorway, interstate, autobahn, fast road, whatever your local translation is. If the quality you desired was picturesque towns and villages passing through several millennia of history, then the old trunk road, the A4, might be more appropriate. It isn't as fast, but with the top down on a convertible and a warm sunny day, it's a lovely drive. And of course, if you didn't care for driving, you could take the train. 150 years ago, a man in a stovepipe hat neatly took care of that. There are options. Those of you that realize that's a brief reference to Safe Principle 3, extra points for you. Don't impose a solution through the vision, but provide the insight to empower people to make sensible decisions. Set the target, set the destination. If you want a real world example, then one of my colleagues has been working with a global food packaging manufacturer. The direction they're heading, and it's no great surprise, less plastic. But to become a target, that needs to be quantifiable. Zero plastic in their packaging by 2030. That's a target that can now be tracked and measured. Knowing where we are and where we want to be, as defined by the current and future vision, there is now a delta. The work item, the change requests to change the business, are epics. It provides the intent for the change. It enables empowerment, not by specifying a solution, but instead providing a set of measures in the form of business outcomes and leading indicators to allow everyone to assess whether the change being enacted is successful. The business outcomes are true business measures, so they should be independent of any development practices. Staff within the development value stream negotiate with the EPIC owners and create features in their backlogs that they think will move the business outcomes on the EPIC in the desired direction. Features are change requests for the system or solution. These should be problems for the team to solve. If they are problems, then you create empowerment at the team level for them to decide how to solve the problems. Standard backlogs containing features, common roles such as product manager. Everyone knows who to talk to and what they're talking about. As features are released, the changes made to the products, the solution should influence the business outcomes within the EPIC, and that informs the EPIC what features it should be negotiating next to keep the business outcomes moving in the right direction. And that creates the feedback loop at the portfolio level. We empower teams and trains to put their own work onto their backlogs. Guiding them are guardrails, rules about where their time, effort, money should be spent. The guardrails are great, but they are just guidelines. So how do we close that accountability loop? How do we know the teams and trains are doing the right thing? The investment horizons guardrail, number 1 here, is better applied across the portfolio as a whole. The 2 that can apply directly to trains and teams are number 2, capacity allocation, and number 3, approve significant initiatives, i.e. the EPICs. You'll need insight back from the trains and teams after each PI planning about how close to the agreed allocation they were. Don't expect perfection. If you get a 28-72 ratio back when you requested a 30-70 ratio, then I would suggest they're honoring the intent of the guardrail and be done with it. Be sensible. Teams and trains also need to reserve some capacity to do their own work. Don't expect absolutely everything in the plan to be linked to the approved significant initiatives, the approved EPICs. Again, have they been sensible? Have they honored the intent? Management engagement, number 4, isn't really a guardrail at all, but a reminder to the leaders of the organization to get involved. Through the vision they've set, that they're sort of targeting their target they're providing for the organization, Now we need measurements to give us insight into how close to that target we are. From our discussion about the minimum viable bureaucracy, we know that these want to be practice-independent measures to allow the teams and trains freedom of choice to evolve their own processes. Outcomes, which brings us to the subject of OKRs. We have to talk about OKRs because everyone is talking about OKRs. Google does OKRs and Google are successful. Therefore, if we do OKRs, we will be successful too. No, Google are successful because they discovered they could monetize web searching by selling advertising space in amongst the search results. That money pump funds the rest of the organization to continually explore and experiment, searching for the next big thing. Most experiments aren't successful. Some make it to be products, but I've not yet seen anything that matches the advertising revenue. OKRs are useful, but they're not a magic bullet. They won't make you successful. They are just a tool for conveying what the organization is trying to achieve. What makes OKRs better than management by objective, which came before, is twofold. Firstly, the key results provide insight into how the objective will be measured. Therefore, both parties can see how close the objective is to being achieved. Secondly, the objective and the key results should be negotiated. There is discussion over what they should be. That the recipient of the objective is involved in the setting of the objective, rather than just having things imposed upon them, means that they will be more likely to accept the objective and attempt to complete it, and that the objective itself is sensible and achievable. Now, OKRs should be pushing at the boundaries of what's possible. They want to be aspirational, but they still need to be sensible. There needs to be some form of route to achieving them. If they aren't sensible, if there is not a route to achievement, then they'll be rejected from the outset and won't even be attempted. Individuals very quickly work out why bother investing effort into something that can't be done. When President John F. Kennedy set out his vision, "We choose to go to the moon," the underlying rocketry technology was sufficiently advanced that it should be possible. Easy? Hell no. President Kennedy even said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we're willing to accept." The vision set gave purpose to the work of thousands of engineers and scientists across the United States of America and beyond. OKRs are there to measure the changes you wish to enact. The measurements give insight into progress towards the target. The measurements need to be gathered continually, maybe iteration by iteration, certainly every program increment, to inform and steer the work being done within the program increments. KPIs, key performance indicators. They're there to measure whether the system is running within acceptable bounds. Now, this could be the actual system, it could be the system that is developing the system. These need to be measured continually to track the changes in the KPIs, and if they're getting too close to those acceptable bounds, then changes may need to be initiated to bring them back within the acceptable bounds. KPIs are measured continually, probably not millisecond by millisecond, but iteration by iteration, certainly every PI, since the PI cadence that allows us to enact any necessary changes. Outcomes. Business outcomes are practice independent. Flow. But how can you measure if the processes are evolving? How can you measure when teams use different processes? Well, separate the state of an item from the processes used to change the state of the item. The states are stable. They are universally applicable. They don't evolve. Different teams or trains might choose different processes to move the item through its states. Some state changes might require several processes. Maybe in your world, accepted to released requires testing locally, testing on a staging environment, testing on another staging environment because we didn't trust the first environment, testing in pre-release because someone else didn't trust the preceding 2 sets of tests, then a review board can give the final all clear to release because they don't trust us making decisions. Then we get to release. Some of those steps are ripe for a little bit of principle 2, systems thinking, and the optimization might well be to remove them. The steps might be changing, but the states remain the same, and the time between accepted and released can be tracked. And as the process changes, it should be bringing that time down. The feature state cards you see on the slides are described in a blog post from safe fellow Ian Spence, link on the slide. They're structured according to the Essence standard from the object modeling group. That provides a lightweight visual way of describing practices so they can be composited into bigger methods. Competency. Has the organization got the required skills? This has to be practice independent as well. Thankfully, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Scaled Agile has, over the last few years, been developing the concept of the 7 core competencies and the measurements around them, the business agility assessments. Scaled Agile evolved the assessments to be practice independent, so organizations could benchmark themselves using their old processes to be able to compare with the results after transformation. Practice independence works for us in that it empowers the teams and trains to evolve their own processes, but still be held accountable to consistent organizational-wide measures. So that's reporting, practice independent measures and 3 dimensions of outcomes, flow, and competency. So to conclude, to get the best out of our teams, we want to empower them to make decisions themselves, but it can't be a free-for-all. There are some procedural aspects the organization has to retain control over that are non-negotiable, but keep them to the absolute minimum. Provide the teams with a vision, a destination to aim for, and they can be empowered to work out how to get there, and close the loop through practice independent measures. Measure how close the organization is to the destination given in the vision. I do need to thank a couple of people. From Ivar Jakobsen, my regular co-trainers, Ian, Keith, and Marika, who've all facilitated the value stream mapping activities as much as I have. It's their insight and experience as much as mine that's been distilled down into these webinars. From Scaled Agile, Rune, Adil, and Beverly for hosting these sessions. And in the background, there's Letitia, who's been organizing everything. Finally, my thanks to any of you that have attended our trainings and offered your organization up for value stream analysis. That generosity has provided us with the insight that we are then able to reflect back to the wider world. So thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting. As always, feedback gratefully appreciated so we can make things better for next time. We've got time for questions, so I'll hand over to Adil to facilitate that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think your talk reached out a few pain points in many organizations. I've got some brilliant comments and some great questions. So you mentioned the minimal viable bureaucracy, and I think that reached out to some of the people. Do you have any advice on how to present this concept in highly bureaucratical organization? Because if you've got maybe a more commercially driven organization, the time to market and having value is something that is more appreciated. But when you work for instance, an administration or a government where they don't have a commercial target, but they do have a duty towards citizens, how would you bring this concept?
It's one of these cases where you have to understand what the organization is trying to achieve and why, and then there is no magic bullet on this one. It's sitting down and talking to them and talking to all the individuals concerned finding out what their concerns are, why they're worried, why they may currently have this giant bureaucracy, and then slowly trying to pare that back. What we do try to get across, what I always try to get across, is that this agility, the lean agile systems are setting up, it is not a complete free-for-all. They are, probably heard the horror stories of cowboy agile, and agile just being no process, no documentation, nothing. We're just going for it. And yeah, that's not where we are. There is a lot of discipline within the agile processes, possibly more discipline than a lot of engineers are actually willing to put in, but okay, that's a separate conversation. There's a lot of discipline in there to do it right. But the big thing is always close those accountability loops. Are they actually doing the right thing? You're empowering to make localized decisions, but are they doing the right thing? Are they moving towards the vision of the organization? The challenge is the organization might not have a vision. And I've seen that in a couple of things. The organization has been set up, but what's it doing? What is purpose? And if that's not clear, then it all starts falling apart. I've only ever had PI planning fail on me once, and I've done a lot of PI plannings in my time. And it should be said, the PI planning process is remarkably robust, but it is garbage in, garbage out. If you don't put a vision in, or the vision that you've put in for what the release train should be planning is garbage, then they'll produce a plan to deliver you that garbage. But it's garbage. Exactly. So this organization, the failure we had, is not that we didn't come up with a plan. We came up with a lovely plan. It's just the organization, lacking a vision, couldn't actually tell whether the plan delivered to them what they needed, because they didn't know what they needed. So there was a couple of levels in that whole thing, that whole answer there. But yeah, we do have control. That's always talking about here. But make sure you know what you're trying to achieve. Make sure you do have a vision. Otherwise, all the control is useless.
Yeah, exactly. And the aim of the game is not to be agile. Agile is just a way to get to your goals. And if they are customer centric or citizen centric, but you need to have that on paper. There's also a question, and it refers as well to organize around value, because that was a big theme the last recession. So a question from Greg, I believe. When starting with existing portfolios, it has been very hard to encourage the leadership teams and middle management to let go of their authority over the teams they manage, and they have effectively led themselves to a value stream organized around their own teams. We are coaching around principle number 10, organize around value, and I've started to look at the product-centric business solution canvas model. Are there anything you might suggest to help the leadership and middle management teams to better understand the reason for organizing around value streams which support the customer more directly? Sorry, very long question.
I mean, the obvious thing is that when you arrange around value, then your ability to get that value delivered is quicker, more efficient, because you're all lined up around it. Whereas if you're still arranged around your historic disciplines or systems and stuff, it may be harder. If you can get that first step to where you are arranged around value, then the metrics become your friend, because they show that it should be working better. If we've done it right, it should be working better than it has before. The challenge is getting to that first step. If you have metrics around what your existing organization is doing, where are things getting stuck? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the issues in getting value delivered? Then you can always highlight those and then use them as the starting point for discussions around, if we did organize around value, we would relieve some of these bottlenecks. We would clear some of these issues away. decision makers in the organization, they have to work out what it is they want to do, particularly the sort of middle levels of management. I sort of covered this back on the first presentation, but if they are historically used to telling their teams what to do, that doesn't happen so much in the SAFe framework. Certainly not through the line management side, the hierarchy part of the dual operating system model. They are just there to look after the people. So if those people want to be involved in the work, maybe they should think about transitioning through to being part of the product strand. Product owner, product management, potentially epic owner if they want to own a change, something in that space, rather than what was historic line management. It now is purely concerned with the pastoral care of an improvement of the workforce. So very different responsibilities from what you might have had historically.
Cool, great. You touch up a lot about OKRs and KPIs. I do have a couple of questions, follow-up questions on that one. Would you recommend OKRs, lead and lag results as the value measure for portfolio epic delivery, or some other mechanisms such as ROI or even flow metrics?
The OKRs are a good way of formatting and negotiating both the business outcomes and leading indicators for epics, also very useful strategic themes, and can be good for visions for agile release trains, development value streams themselves. Tend not to get used for the actual objectives that come out of teams in a PI planning event, because the actual process of formulating OKRs is quite cumbersome in nature. Those negotiations, sitting down, thinking of what you should be measuring in terms of the key results, that takes quite a long time, probably more time than you've got within a PI planning event, where there's usually somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of team breakout space where the objectives are formulated. But up at the epic level, sorting out the business outcomes, the leading indicators, as in filling in the epic hypothesis statement template, usually takes about half an hour to do the words for the elevator pitch, and then the rest of the day is spent sorting out the metrics. And that's where we actually have the proper negotiations. And you do want to spend the rest of the day working out the metrics, because they've got to be right, because you're going to use them every single program increment to prove that this epic should be allowed to continue, that it's gone in the right direction. It should be allowed to keep consuming funds, which is effort from the development value streams, the release trains. So they need to be good. And unfortunately, at that level, up at the epic level, the metrics you tend to have to gather are not the neat, easy metrics that bubble up out of our agile tooling, like teams and trains have. It's things like, can we see if we've changed the figures on the balance sheet? Do we have to run another customer survey to find out if the customers are happy? It's real business metrics, which are hard,
Exactly.
but measure what matters.
Exactly. And regarding this point, there's also a follow-up question. So what kind of factors would you put into value definition, knowing that most of the time the stakeholders will want to have financial measures? They will want to know, for instance, the return on investment. They will know the revenue. How do we convince them, and how can we put other variables that are also ultimately important in describing what value is?
Well, there's no harm having return on investment as a target within the business outcomes. Indeed, often it is one of the business outcomes that we have made. I'm assuming here that we are in a for-profit type organization, that this epic has generated us some revenue, basically. It needs to be a target. So how much are you expecting? how much and what time frame are you aiming for that within? And then sometimes we don't know which features we need to do in order to achieve that. We run the experiments, we try some things, we see if they've moved in the right direction, the feedback loop kicks in, we carry on building features until either we are building the business outcomes up as expected, or it tells us it's not happening. And then maybe that's time to cut our losses. Pivot without mercy or guilt before we waste any more money on this idea that the epic is proposing. Epics work best when they are opportunities, ideas that we would like to pursue, when you have choice. If it's all just work to be done, you don't actually need a portfolio level and process, it's just work. Just keep turning the sausage machine. But when you have choice over freedom of what you want to do, ideas to pursue, then you've got much greater chance of doing the right thing, because the ideas that don't work, you can turn away. I quite like the phrase that Henrik Nieberg utilizes, and I've pronounced that name completely wrongly. There's a in that there somewhere, but anyhow.
No worries.
I'll owe him a beer because he owes me a beer in the other direction at some point when we next cross. He uses the phrase bets. It is the company placing bets that this idea or this product is going to generate them revenue. But of course, nobody knows until we try it. That's why it's a hypothesis in the epic statement. So not that the executives like being told this, but everything at the business level is an experiment. And you don't know until you try.
Exactly. Following on that, would you say that it's better if we've got, for instance, for a large initiative, an epic, many different business outcomes? Would it be better to have one epic per business outcome, or could we have one epic and different business outcome and run different types of experiments?
I think that is going to be very context specific, depending on what that epic is actually trying to do. There is no harm having several business outcomes on an epic. Value, say money, is not always everything. Sometimes, as well as getting the money, there is insight, customer signups, other things that will lead to more in the future are also valid business outcomes as part of the same thing. But if you've got a set of business outcomes because the thing could be done in as different pieces, as independent incremental bits, then maybe that is a trigger that yes, you could separate the split the epic up. You do have to be a little bit careful slicing epics up. Make sure that when you're slicing them, you don't accidentally lose the value. An easiest example for this would be, say, GDPR. I know it's all in the past now, but imagine we had to make our organization GDPR compliant. It only occurs when the whole organization is GDPR compliant. So you wouldn't want to split the GDPR epic up. You wouldn't want to have it as an epic that is Department 1, Department 2, Department 3. It's all got to come together, because if any one of the bits is left out, then we're in trouble. So when you do split these things up, do be careful that you are not accidentally losing the value as a whole, because the bits have to, they run independently once they have been sliced up. It's not like they get assembled back together like splitting of stories. It's not the same sort of mechanic. Everything goes different when you get above the portfolio teams, trains, dividing line. The things happen a little bit different at the top. Looks like it should recurse all the way up, but no, that's not how it works.
Not in that case, indeed, yes. And maybe the last question, more the human type of questions, because we've got a lot of questions about value, but would it be okay for a product manager to become an Epic owner at some point?
I don't see why not. The main thing I would be concerned about is, do they have enough time? Product management is quite a full-time job, negotiating with stakeholders, facilitating your product owners to help them, to get them to help build the backlogs. There's a lot going on there. Can they do the Epic role on top of that? If they feel they can, then I don't see why not. The only challenge you might have is argument over potential conflict of interest, in that they would favor their Epic over other Epics that their release train might also have to contribute to. But I could also counter that by the fact that in my world, product managers don't do the prioritization. They facilitate the stakeholders doing the prioritization. So that actually means they don't have a great, as much influence as perhaps people think they do, because the prioritization is being validated by the stakeholders, the business owners, to the release train. If you want more on that, I did a presentation on decentralizing outwards and upwards at one of the SAFE summits a few years back. I did it in person, so it must be 2019.
19, indeed.
I don't know.
Right.
All the ones where we're sat here on a webcam, time goes very strangely.
Exactly. Fortunately, we're back for the SAFE Summit this year in Europe.
We are indeed. I will be there. I may see some of you there.
I definitely see you. So there are still a lot of questions, but unfortunately, it's already 5. I mean, for you, 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. for the rest of Europe. So I guess we will probably have to park those questions and maybe do another Q&A or another session. But I would like to thank you, Brian, for taking the time and to go through this very exciting and somewhat complicated series of subjects. I hope you appreciated it. Again, the recordings will be made available. And thank you all for all your participation. And we hope to see you soon in any kind of meetings, meetups, or even the sub-summit. So thank you very much, Brian, again. And thank you all to the participants, and see you later.
Thanks, Adil. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.